Boss stared at a flash drive containing the answer she had crossed worlds to find. The records connected Kim Hajin to the Kwango evacuation shelter, the place where she had carried out her first massacre as a child. One infant had survived that night because Boss could not kill a life too young to threaten her. Now, the evidence suggested that abandoned baby had grown into the man who cooked for her, protected her, and looked at her with sorrow instead of hatred. But before Boss could decide what that truth meant, Hajin was already waiting on the second floor with a rifle aimed at Jyn Saiuk. The confrontation he had prepared for years was about to begin. The elevator carried Hajin down for 4 hours. He passed the time speaking to the Manin egg, then checked the Desert Eagle until every transformation, reload, and firing motion had become automatic. When the doors opened, Floor 2 had shifted back into a hot forest. Hajin climbed through the trees until he found a branch overlooking Luke's plaza from a cliff that protected his rear. The second wave had not arrived. Hajin waded through heat, cold, daylight, and darkness. Whenever boredom weakened his focus, Demon Cunning speech convinced him that remaining hidden was enjoyable. After 24 hours, nearly 2,000 players appeared in pillars of light. Kim Suho stood out immediately, but Hajin forced himself to look past the friend he had not met for 3 years. Then he found Jyn Saiuk. She stood alone with crossed arms, listening to Luke, as though the administrator's warning about newbie hunters was beneath her concern. Hajin did not fire near Luke. Even a low-floor administrator could erase him, so he followed Jyn Saiuk from the canopy until she had walked 30 minutes into the wilderness. Jyn Saiuk killed a black-blood boar and dismantled it with information gathered outside the tower. Confident that every hunter would recognize her as the greater predator, she continued north without a companion. The first sniper round crossed the forest before Jyn Saiuk sensed the wind changing. The first shot pierced Jyn Saiuk's shoulder before she could raise a complete defense. She forced herself upright, stitched the wound with magic, and destroyed a line of trees in the attack's direction. A second bullet struck her barrier and was deflected. Jyn Saiuk believed she had already adapted until the third round curved around the shield and buried itself in her thigh. Hajin dropped from the trees, removed his hood, and approached openly. Jyn Saiuk recognized the man who had defeated her with a coin in Busan and surrounded herself with dozens of magical weapons. She asked whether he had descended only to die. Hajin answered that he had come closer because he intended to kill her completely, not merely take one life from a distance. Magic blades, spears, arrows, and clubs filled the air, a fiver. In bullet time, each weapon slowed enough for Hajin to calculate that most required 2 assault rifle rounds to destroy. He repeatedly released bullet time for fractions of a second, then activated it again, preserving his concentration while forcing Jyn Saiuk to spend more and more mana. When her barrage weakened, Hajin activated extraction and permanent materialization. Every remaining weapon condensed into a mana crystal and fell harmlessly between them, like hard rain. Jyn Saiuk admitted that he was stronger for now, but asked whether he could kill her 7 times. Hajin kicked her to her knees, pressed the shotgun to her head, and answered with the words, "See you again." The Stigma-infused slug erased Jyn Saiuk into blue particles, but the system treated the execution as something more than an ordinary kill. The system announced that Hajin had defeated a target and rewarded him with increased statistics, 2 special consolidation tickets, and the TP Jyn Saiuk had carried. The wording made no sense until Hajin searched 3 years of smartwatch logs. Jyn Saiuk's obsession had once created a spell that selected him as her target. His accumulated luck had reversed the gift. Instead of empowering Jyn Saiuk when she pursued him, the system now rewarded Hajin whenever he defeated her. The special consolidation tickets could strengthen a gift, physique, art, or piece of equipment. Their existence had never appeared in the original story, making them both valuable and dangerous. A second system message ordered Hajin to attend Medea's contribution ceremony in 2 days. Refusing would sacrifice both the rewards and the administrator's favor. Before leaving, Hajin collected 26 crystals extracted from Jyn Sahyuk's magic. He did not yet know their purpose, but power of that quality would never be discarded. While Hajin studied the rewards of victory, Jyn Saiuk awoke in a wooden room with the memory of a shotgun still pressed against her skull. Jyn Saiuk revived in her private waiting room, hyperventilating as the system informed her that she would remain confined until the next tutorial began in November. Rage came first, followed by a deeper exhaustion. She could blame restricted statistics or Hajin's 2-month advantage, but the truth remained simple. He had defeated her without leaving room for excuses. For the second time, the same man had crushed her. The realization weakened her anger enough for doubt to appear, whether she could ever fulfill the purpose that had sustained her entire life. When she asked the system for something to pass the time, it mocked her with books about losing, illiteracy, positive speech, and anger management. A storm of books eventually buried her. From the pile, one title caught her attention, Machiavelli's The Prince, a book written for rulers and those who intended to become one. Jyn Sahyuk opened it. Defeat had not made her gentle, but for the first time since arriving on Earth, it forced her to sit still long enough to learn. The system had taken her freedom, but the greater wound was Hajin's final promise. "See you again!" meant he had no intention of allowing her next life to remain safe. Hajin did not wait for that next meeting. Before returning to Prestige, he used Floor 2 to remove several other threats from the board. Hajin spent the next day hunting 7 Jinn who would become serious problems later. A succubus named Cecilia died to a single assault rifle round before her enthralled followers understood what had happened. The kills supplied TP food and a safer future. Hajin also found another dwarven stele and briefly confirmed from a distance that Kim Soo-ho was progressing normally. At the elevator, the mining egg began to crack. Hajin wrapped it in stigma, so the creature inside could emerge within a warm membrane of his magic. A wet, ordinary-looking chick pushed through the shell. Its appearance was unimpressive, but it was already level 5 with perception and magic power at 6 points. The newborn recognized Hajin as its master and demanded a name. It rejected Pami, Phoenix, Lionel Ronaldo, Sun Hungmin, and every other suggestion with increasingly offended chirps. After 30 minutes, it finally approved the absurd title Mr. Spartan Keezer Soze Macbeth Jr. Hajin shortened it to Spartan before either of them could reconsider. Spartan awakened a perception link that allowed them to share sight and thoughts. A second trait granted free travel between Earth and the tower, along with several items each day. The 20,000 TP egg had become one of Hajin's most valuable investments. He placed the newborn beside him and rode the elevator back toward Prestige. At the same time, Boss had already left the tower for a different hunt, one aimed not at a monster, but at the truth behind Kim Hajin. On floor 4, Boss told Jane and Cheek Young that she could no longer ignore the doubts created by the magnifying glass. She needed to leave the tower and find an answer. Her determination briefly collapsed into embarrassment when she admitted she lacked 300 TP for the return tickets. Jane immediately realized Boss had spent too much supporting novelists and artists in the community. After enduring Jane's lecture, Boss returned to the Chameleon Troop hideout on Earth. She ignored Cetrin's greeting and went directly to Droon's room. Droon had once investigated Hajin independently. Boss ordered him to reveal where Jin Sahyuk was hiding, convinced that the informant knew why Hajin carried emotions she could not understand. The sharpness in Boss's voice reminded Droon of the person she had been before Hajin softened the hideout around her. He understood that refusing would only send her searching alone. Boss did not say she wanted to kill Hajin. She wanted proof, something solid enough to explain why he pitied her past and still remained within reach of her shadow. While Boss approached the person who knew Hajin's history, Hajin returned to Prestige and continued building the future he wanted Kim Soo-ho to inherit. Back in Prestige, Hajin found Ryrie shop thriving. Goblin-made potions sold quickly, while Henry and Kiri had already begun studying literacy and business management. The empty land outside the wall had started producing weeds. Hajin rolled random dice and received clean rice and meat, flavored corn suitable for cultivation. He recruited 5 starving NPC farmers, fed their families, repaired nearby ruins into cabins, and ordered them to work hard without destroying their health. Every sale pulled TP away from players and placed it into the hands of prestigious residents. Hajin intended to make the city choose survival before Kim Suho reached the decision that would determine its fate. When he returned to the empty hideout, loneliness pressed against him until Spartan chirped from his shoulder. Hajin carried the bird into the underground training room. He circulated spirit power through his blood with Stigma, trying to create a breathing method that used his entire body. The first success forced black clumps of tar from his lungs. The system confirmed that repeated training could produce an unexpected result. Hajin rested, opened the community, and found a desperate request involving the essence of the Strait. Someone inside the guild hideout was dying from a banshee's curse, and the timing matched the messages Hajin had received from Naun Jaeangman. Hajin ordered himself to ignore the post and continue training. 30 minutes later, he was standing outside the essence of the Strait hideout, wearing a hood and false beard. Yi Ji-yoon recognized him almost immediately. The beard matched the disguise Hajin had used years earlier, but she protected his identity and pulled him past the suspicious guards. On the 3rd floor, a pale girl lay barely breathing beneath a black curse that had climbed from her shoulder toward her neck. Hajin no longer had room to deny the truth. Nayu Gangman was Cha Naun. The anonymous student who called him Hyung trusted his advice and unknowingly accepted his money had been the person he feared meeting most. Yi Ji-yoon confessed that Naun had received the curse while saving her. Guilt broke through her words until Hajin silenced the crying and promised the patient could still be treated. He handed over a counter-agent worth 1,500 TP and told Yi Ji-yoon to apply it directly to the curse's root. The black face on Naun's shoulder screamed as the medicine burned into it. Hajin prepared to extract the weakened curse, but Cha Naun's own magic suddenly surrounded it. The power that had been suppressed for weeks began devouring the curse from within. He wiped the sweat from Naun's forehead and watched her breathing settle. The action carried no forgiveness and demanded no reward. It was simply the only choice he could make while she was dying. Hajin left before Naun woke and asked Yi Ji-yoon to identify her rescuer with one word: an extra, a background actor. The next morning, Cha Naun woke beneath real sunlight. The system recognized her as the first player to overcome the curse with outside help and unlocked the achievement Hard to Kill. She gained curse-devouring magic power, though half of the achievement remained sealed until floor 6. Her body was weak, but the darkness inside her shoulder had disappeared. Yoo Ji-yoon hugged her and claimed that a passing mercenary had brought the cure without demanding payment. Naun immediately distrusted an act of kindness without a motive. Ji-yoon repeatedly distracted her with the ice crystal longsword recovered from the hidden quest. The weapon had been waiting for Naun while Kim Youngjin used her red spear in her place. When Naun demanded the rescuer's identity, Yi Ji-yoon finally repeated Hajin's message. A background actor had visited. The phrase immediately connected to Extra 7 in Naun's mind. She assumed the older bearded man was the gaming mentor she had trusted for years. Embarrassed, she messaged Extra 7 and insisted that the patient had been a friend rather than herself. Surviving the curse made Naun recognize something she had denied. Despite saying she wanted to die, she still wanted to live, move forward, and become strong enough to face the truth. She rose to resume sword training after 3 lost weeks. The person who saved her remained hidden behind 2 identities, but the help itself became another reason not to surrender. Elsewhere on Earth, Boss reached Yoo Jin-hyuk's office with none of Hajin's restraint. Boss entered Yoo Jin-hyuk's office without negotiation. When he refused to answer questions about Kim Hajin, 3 seconds of violence destroyed the room and left the former hero coughing blood. To Yoo Jin-hyuk, she resembled a lion showing its teeth because it was afraid. She was overwhelmingly powerful, but her aggression did not carry the calm hunger of someone who had already decided to kill. Villagers approached outside, giving boss hostages without her needing to ask. Jin Sahyuk abandoned his attempt to delete the files and transferred the investigation onto a flash drive. He recognized her resemblance to the young girl his gift had seen leaving Hajin at an orphanage. From that, he correctly guessed that she was the current leader of the Chameleon Troop. Before surrendering the drive, Jin Sahyuk warned that the contents would cause regret regardless of whether boss wanted Hajin alive or dead. He asked whether she remembered everyone she had killed. Boss refused to answer and reached for the drive, but the question had already found the weakness beneath her anger. Jin Sahyuk continued speaking until boss struck him unconscious. When he woke later, the office was ruined and the flash drive was gone. Boss returned alone, inserted the drive into her smartwatch, and opened the box Jin Sahyuk had begged her to leave closed. The files began with facts everyone knew. Hajin's rise through Cube, his departure after the attack, and his later work with Geronimo. Boss nearly dismissed the investigation as useless. Then one phrase stopped her hand. The Kwangho incident. The name pulled a buried memory from more than 20 years earlier, when the former boss had sent a child on her first test. Bell, the former Black Seat, had accompanied her into the evacuation shelter. He taught that survival required killing first and forced young boss to perform the massacre herself. The order had named 96 targets. Inside, however, a pregnant woman gave birth. Hidden beneath her mother's body was a 97th life. An infant covered in blood and crying among the dead. Boss could not kill a child incapable of threatening her. Bell allowed the exception because the newborn had not been listed in the order, and Boss carried the baby to an orphanage. Jin Sahyuk's evidence connected that infant to Kim Hajin. The birth date, orphanage record, pregnant victim, and testimony that the murderer spared one baby all pointed in the same direction. At last, Hajin's feelings became understandable. His sorrow for Boss's past, his desire to protect her, and the absence of hatred were not random emotions created by a broken artifact. Boss wondered whether Hajin knew everything and had already forgiven her, or whether the last 3 years had merely been a trial she did not understand. Unable to reach an answer, she closed her eyes and surrendered to sleep. While Boss slept beneath the weight of 97 lives, the tower gathered its 100 highest contributors inside Medea's palace. 2 days later, players returned from higher floors for Medea's contribution ceremony. Hajin met Jane and Kyeok Jung outside the palace, both wearing equipment obtained on floor 5. Boss was absent, having left on personal business. To prevent the Black Lotus identity from exposing him, Jane changed Hajin's face into that of a sharper, older man. The palace separated guests by contribution rank. Jane and Chukyung received gold badges, while Hajin's destruction of 3 control towers earned the only diamond badge. Asked for a name, Hajin chose Buyong, Lotus. Min registered as Anji, and Yak Young used his own given name, believing every alias should contain 2 syllables. Gold and diamond guests entered through separate doors, but every path led to the same extra-dimensional reception hall. Behind the final door waited 100 of the tower's strongest players. Hajin walked past veterans from Essence of the Strait, the Hero Association, Desolate Moon, the Temple of Justice, and Pandemonium. A mysterious robed man sat among the highest ranks. Likely Bell. The room interpreted Buyong's unstable disguise as a dangerous aura. Hajin considered himself a hyena among tigers, but everyone else saw the unknown archer, who had destroyed 3 towers without revealing his face. When the diamond door closed behind him, every conversation in the palace shifted toward Black Lotus. Before Hajin arrived, Kim Youngjin had reviewed the rankings. Guild cooperation had collapsed because Jane repeatedly manipulated groups while disguised, allowing Black Lotus to claim nearly every tower contribution point. Only the final control tower had been destroyed by a coalition. The other 3 left nothing but rubble, and a lotus made from black magic. To the gathered heroes, the diamond seat belonged to an archer capable of erasing a fortress with 1 attack. Some wondered whether even divine archer Jin Sahyuk could suppress him. Seo Youngji judged that Black Lotus carried an ominous aura and advised Kim Youngjin not to become involved. She did not know the danger came from Jane's restricted disguise flickering around Hajin. Medea entered in blue and red, but even her theatrical arrival lost impact when she stopped to stare at Hajin's robe. Either's craftsmanship had captured the administrator's attention immediately. The Diamond Door blessing permanently increased Hajin's TP rewards from prestige quests. Similar blessings and payments awaited every contributor according to rank. Medea served rare level 3 food and encouraged conversation. Instead of relaxing the room, the invitation gave every strong player permission to study the silent man seated beside her. The first person reckless enough to confront him was Aileen. Aileen poked Hajin's shoulder and insisted they had met in the tutorial city, where someone dressed in black had thrown vodka at her. Hajin used demon cunning speech to deny remembering her, but the altered voice came out far more threatening than intended. Conversation across the hall stopped. Aileen recognized magic inside the voice and took the denial as a challenge. She called him the color black and began forming a spirit speech command that would force him to remove his hood. Before she could finish, Hajin pushed a large piece of steak into her mouth and told her to eat. The physical interruption broke the command before it could settle. He added a harmless hypnotic suggestion that strengthened the flavor. Aileen's glare froze while she slowly chewed, swallowed, and discovered that the food was genuinely delicious. Medea praised the first-ranked player for generously feeding another guest. Most of the room looked away, unwilling to decide whether they had witnessed kindness or a warning. Only the mysterious robed man continued watching with interest. Hajin suspected Belle, but the ceremony was too public for either side to test the assumption. With the confrontation contained, Medea began the award ceremony. The first 10 contributors were offered rewards far beyond the TP given to lower ranks. As the only diamond-ranked player, Hajin was allowed to choose 4 items before anyone else. Medea allowed Hajin to choose 4 rewards. He immediately selected the trait recovery coupon, the only item capable of restoring one of the traits sealed when he entered the tower. His second choice was Wind of Odyssey. Instead of taking Thor's lightning, he chose 2 evolving artifacts, the Orb of Regeneration and the Mystic Key. The room believed he had made a mistake. Hajin knew that special skills still had 3 rarities above artifact grade. While evolving items could grow into abilities, Medea could no longer control. Outside the palace, Jane complained until Hajin handed her Wind of Odyssey. Her disappointment vanished immediately, and the skill suited a thief who depended on movement and escape. Hajin offered Cheo Kyung-young 5,000 TP, but the warrior remained distracted by the powerful opponents he had been forbidden to challenge. Hajin quietly returned the money to his inventory. Then Boss appeared after a week away. Her face was thinner, and she stared at Hajin long enough for his discomfort about Chundong's past to return. For the first time in ordinary conversation, she called him Hajin instead of newbie. She almost asked something important, then swallowed the words and followed him toward the hideout. Hajin tried to dissolve the tension by introducing the newest member of their home. Inside the hideout, Hajin introduced Spartan as a loyal bird that would recognize only one master. Spartan chirped at Jyn Saiuk and Boss as though considering the claim. Hajin opened his arms. Spartan ignored him, flew directly into Boss's chest, and demanded affection with cheerful cries. Boss looked between the bird and Hajin in confusion before stroking its head. Spartan responded by singing and burying itself more comfortably in her arms. Juk Young mocked Spartan's loyalty, and Jane concluded that the bird was clearly male. Hajin could only stare while his divine pet defected without hesitation. Hajin officially allowed Spartan to stay with Boss. The decision gave her a living presence that asked no questions about Kwangho and carried no fear of her hands. Alone afterward, Hajin used one special consolidation ticket on Master Sharpshooter. The gift's basic strength and future potential both increased. He saved the second ticket and turned to the trait recovery coupon. Because the orb could replace the role of medicinal memory, he chose the trait that improved every item he owned. Random consolidation returned in a restricted form, but even a 30% improvement was enough to change the value of an evolving artifact. Random consolidation could still scan 5 items, though its range had fallen to -10 through 30%. The Orb of Regeneration received a favorable 24% enhancement. The orb promised broad recovery and regeneration, while the Mystic Key would eventually develop offensive and defensive uses beyond opening locks. Both could accompany Hajin into the real world. Rachel messaged him excitedly about the palace conflict, her 33rd place ranking, the royal court's land, and its growing crops. Hajin pretended not to know that Ryrie Shop had been instructed to favor her guild. Her expressive messages revealed how much she enjoyed the tower, without the constant political weight of Britain. Hajin allowed her to use their conversation like a diary whenever she needed one. A sudden quest announced that Medea wanted Hajin's robe. Since he could create another, he decided to surrender it if an opportunity appeared and collect the administrator's favor in return. That night, Boss sat beside Hajin's bed because Spartan wanted to return to its owner. Her silent watch felt strange, but she only said the bird was cute and reminded him that they were traveling together. Boss left with a bitter smile. Neither of them mentioned the USB, the infant, or the blood connecting them, but the distance between them had stopped widening. The next morning, Hajin prepared to explore the manifested demon realm with the person who now knew exactly who he had once been. Before departure, Hajin trained his spirit power breathing with the orb in hand. The pain of extracting stigma remained severe, but regeneration allowed him to recover more quickly. Spartan briefly shared its sight from Boss's bath. Hajin severed the connection immediately, slapped himself, and decided that cooking a certain bird might be an appropriate punishment. After the misunderstanding, the Chameleon Troop entered Floor 5, a volcanic demon realm filled with lava, smoke, crystal checkpoints, and enemies far stronger than those in Prestige. Jane and Chu Kigongyong formed one team to continue a quest they had already begun. Hajin planned to search for abandoned NPCs, hidden quests, and forgotten items from the original setting. That left Boss as his partner. She accepted without hesitation, climbed onto the dwarven supercar, and watched Hajin struggle to speak normally around her. Hajin blamed the stammering on cigarette withdrawal. Boss did not believe the excuse, but she remained behind him as the vehicle accelerated into the volcanic horizon. They entered the next stage carrying different secrets. Hajin did not know Boss had opened the box, and Boss did not know whether his kindness was forgiveness. Hajin's first execution of Jyn Saiuk succeeded, but the victory also began a cycle. She would return, stronger and more cautious, while the reverse target continued rewarding the person she wanted most to kill. Cha Naun survived because the enemy she hated still could not leave her to die. Boss learned that the same man was the infant she spared after destroying his family, yet he had spent 3 years protecting the person responsible. Now Hajin and Boss traveled together into Floor 5, separated by a truth neither can speak. Their next journey will decide whether that silence becomes trust, guilt, or another reason to kill.